Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalren and it's Prepatch. We get to test out all our classes. It is a perfect time to level a bunch of alts while trying to figure out what you're probably going to end up playing for BFA once it finally comes out, once Kultiras as well as Zandalar Islands come out. Now, to my surprise, this is that hard of a decision because I keep having people come over to either the live stream or into the videos, into the comments, asking me for different things like, hey, can you test this class? Can you show off this specialization? Whether it's a PvP scenario, PvE scenario, dungeon raid, whatever. I have so many people asking me what these classes play like because a lot of people are not sure what they want to play for BFA. Now, usually people just stick to whatever class they've been playing since Vanilla, TBC, Wrath, whatever class you started out with, but with so many changes happening, and in BFA in particular, with the GCD changes affecting just about every single class in the game, it is a hard decision. But one of the things that I see from people is they just want to play a class that's either fun or mechanically interesting, something that just doesn't put you to sleep. Maybe you want a class that's going to be competitive no matter what you end up doing in the game, be it PvP or PvE. And lastly, some people just want a class that functions pretty well in the new BFA GCD changes. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't enjoy the downtime, and in this video, I'm going to give you guys some of the classes that I find fun that are not really all that GCD hampered, at least from my opinion. Classes that I think will be pretty competitive in one way or another when it comes to BFA at the end game level. Because as somebody who has the opportunity in my life to be able to spend numerous amount of hours into BFA beta and seeing the comparison and changes in the pre-patch, I can kind of give you guys an idea of what classes are looking like for the end game as well as what they're playing right now. In fact, most of these classes don't really change that much at 110 besides a few gear changes, but what we're taking a look at is the basics of what a class brings with gear or without gear, what's fun, what's not fun, what's looking good, what isn't on its own. By the way, this list was really hard to make because there's not a single class specialization that I actually just didn't like. There wasn't a single spec playstyle that was like, no, I don't like it. So if I do place a specialization and or a class at the very end of the list, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it made it into my top 5. That was like, yes, there's something about this class, maybe one specialization that I'm honestly really digging about it. So to start it off, we're going to start with the Windwalker Monks, and I guess the Monk as the class. But Windwalker Monk is the one that is kind of spearheading the decision for me for Monks. I absolutely love their rotation and their mastery. I fell in love with it ever since they introduced that kind of mastery. I believe it was in Legion, where your rotation was your abilities deal more damage as long as they are not a follow of one another. So as long as you're not repeating abilities back to back to back, as long as you're kind of forced to diversify your rotation so you don't have, blackout kick, blackout kick, blackout kick, over and over and over again, as long as you have the diversity, you gain a bit more damage. What I like about Windwalkers as well is the playstyle and the resource play that you have. You have the energy bar, so you're trying to make sure you're not capped on energy. You always want to make sure you're spending energy, so you're never having wasteful amount of energy generated, but you're also trying to generate chi. You're trying to convert that chi into abilities, and you're trying to change those abilities and chain them in a way where they are not repeat of each other. On top of that, the ability of blackout kick reduces the cooldown of some of your bigger abilities like Rising Sun and Fists of Fury, which are one of your hardest hitting abilities. So having to juggle all of these things together, there's a lot of thinking that goes on in my brain. Maybe somebody who's been playing Windwalker since the very beginning of Legion kind of finds it monotonous, boring, or maybe there's some sort of muscle memory that was, I guess, adapted. But if you're somebody who's coming in new to the specialization or never tried it, you actually might enjoy it in terms of just the rotation alone. On top of that, I see that Brewmaster Monk is actually doing not that bad as a tank for, let's say, 120 mythic pluses as well as raids in BFA, and Mistweavers are actually being hailed as one of the strongest healers in the game at max level for BFA as well. So those are the two other specializations that you can bring. But if anything, I feel like every dungeon or raid group will want a monk no matter what. As a class, if you're trying to be competitive, you are bringing a debuff where enemies take 5% more physical damage. Everybody is going to want that in a raid. And if you're somebody who's flexible to be able to maybe fill in as a role as a healer for your raid, or take on the tanking opportunities, or simply if Windwalker is just doing a lot of damage and you want to spread that pressure all over the place with a melee heavy group, I feel like Windwalker could be pretty good in a dungeon or a raid scenario. Just because of that buff, everybody's going to want a monk. So if you want to play a class that's going to be wanted, monks are going to be great for that. The fourth on the list would have to be Survival Hunter, but Hunters as well in general, because Hunters are just so much fun. I absolutely love Hunter, and Survival is a specialization that really blends it for me. It's not the most confusing or the most complicated playstyle ever, it just has a lot of things kind of working in tandem with each other. It's a playstyle of a Hunter specialization that is a melee Hunter spec, but you still retain actually a lot of the abilities that make you a ranged DPS. You have a lot of that 40-yard range to a lot of your abilities. Hell, you even have cooldowns to turn your melee abilities into 40-yard range, so having range, whether it's 40 yards or melee, shouldn't really ever be an issue. So I like the flexibility that comes with the spec. It's a pretty simple playstyle of just dumping your focus into your main ability of Raptor Strike, maintaining a dot the whole time, throwing grenades whenever you got them, and then of course there's a little bit of that extra pet play where you are a specialization that plays with a pet, and depending on the pet of choice, it can give you different buffs and different playstyles. That pet also allows you to play into your range playstyle, as the pet can run over to the enemy and start biting them on the heels before you can even get to them. Overall, the specialization has a lot of freedom in terms of flexibility, such as mobility, whether you want to be at melee or up close, whether you want to disengage and leap away from the enemy, or harpoon right to them up close and personal. Do you want to multi-dot a bunch of enemies? You can. Do you want to position and throw your grenades to cover as wide of an area as you want? Yes, you can do that too. Do you want to have a pet playstyle where the pet is trying to put as many bleeds on enemies, so you add a more dot-based playstyle? Well, you can, and I just absolutely love the flexibility, the choices that you can make in terms of how you want to play. On top of that, Marksman is another specialization that I absolutely dig. Another simple specialization in terms of the playstyle, but very satisfying, as the numbers and just how much punch your aim shot has, especially in the opener or during execute phases, and some different talents that can kind of combo together, is just a very fun spec. Overall, Hunters are a specialization that's going to dominate in the 40 yards division without having to cast a single spell, and of course in dungeons and raids everybody's going to want a Hunter. With the changes to the aggro tables and how aggro functions for tanks, you're going to have a Hunter who will need to be there to misdirect a lot of the damage, whether you're Beast Mastery, whether you're Marksmanship, whether you are Survival. On top of that, in raids, Hunters have generally been the best range DPS that can DPS on the move, making them very flexible and reliable for a lot of the raid fights, as Hunters can actually just do so many aspects of the mechanics. Let's say it's a soak fight, let's say it's a meteor crashing from the sky, and somebody needs to rush over 60 yards away from the boss and try to soak it, whether by themselves or in a group. You can either have the whole raid group run over there and try to split the damage, or you can have one Hunter disengage over there, just scurry on over there while the pet is shredding through the boss, pop turtle shell, absorb all the damage, and still have enough time to come back home for dinner. As a number 3, I would have to put Fury Warriors, but Warriors in general as well. I'm actually quite impressed with both of the DPS specs when it comes to Warriors. First things first, Warriors are bringing a buff to the team. They're bringing a buff where they give 10% more attack power to the whole team, so anybody that does any melee damage, you're gonna need at least one warrior, and there's only so many tank spots, so you have a pretty good opportunity to play Fury or Arms, whether you want to cleave the boss or cleave the adds and just be a wrecking ball of disaster in the enemy's face. Everybody's gonna want at least one warrior in their group one way or another. And what really makes it work for me when it comes to Warriors is Fury Warrior, and this is something you won't really notice on BFA with all the GCD changes. Fury Warrior is one spec that's not affected by GCD, or at least barely affected compared to some of the other classes. That is because of your new mastery and your enrage mechanic, as well as just how much haste you can build up, and especially feels great when it comes to playing a character that has actual good haste worth of gear. The playstyle itself revolves around you being able to go into enrage. While you are enraged, you gain a buttload of haste, which reduces the global cooldown as well as the time between abilities, allowing you to get more abilities out back to back to back. Yes, there'll be some abilities you'll just have to waste a global just to buff yourself, but at least that global cooldown is going to be just a little bit shorter than some of the other classes. Overall, I've seen so many people praising the spec, and for good measure. Not only does it deal good damage right now, at least at level 110 pre-patch, it also feels really smooth to play, feels really good, and I like the synergy that they did when it comes to your rage generation and how cooldowns are now more about, hey, here's a cooldown to generate more rage. If you generate rage, you can get more rampages. More rampages means damage. You kind of work for your own bread, instead of just, hey, here's a flat buff for crit, do whatever you want, go ham, kid. And when it comes to Arms Warrior, I can't really say much. I just haven't been playing Arms in ever, but I did get to hit a train dummy a couple times and run a little bit of content for PvE here and there, and Arms actually feels pretty good. I kind of like how they gave him back a lot of the tools by, let's say, Bladestorm is an actual good ability for AoE and a fairly decent filler for single target. How in Sweeping Strikes, oh my goodness, does Cleave feel really good. Big Mortal Strikes and a nice new mastery with an extra bleed effect, sign me up. I'm actually a huge fan of all of that. I'm a huge fan of what they've done with the spec so far, and it feels a little bit like, let's say, Fury is the cousin that's more rowdy, that's just kind of all over the place, just bashing the enemies. As on Arms, you're more like a chef. You're more supposed to be making precise cuts in the enemy, trying to get lineups, trying to get setups for that one big mortal strike and trying to make him as accurate as possible. That's so it kind of is cool to see the dichotomy between the Arms and Fury, but overall both of them feel really great to play. Then I would have to go to Warlocks because, oh my god, Demonology feels exceptionally good to play, just Demo alone. I mean, yes, Destry feels good too. Affliction feels great too, but honestly, I would put, if those two specs did not do any damage, I would put Demonology on this list. This spec, if you want to play a specialization that objectively feels probably the best to play, unless you're one of those few weird people that doesn't like the amazingness that is Demonology Warlock, then I don't know what else to tell you. I love what Demonology Warlock does in terms of your basic rotation. What I like about it is there's a little bit of mix of RNG and non-RNG elements. One of your basic playstyles is you cast in Shadow Balls to build up soul shards. You use the soul shards to summon demons. When certain demons expire, you can get a proc for this other ability called Demon Bolt to become instacast. Every single imp has a 10% chance to give you free procs when they expire after you summon them, and they get the rotation out and then they just disappear. So with the imps, there's a bit of that RNG. But certain other demons that you summon, like your demon dogs, your dreadhounds, once you summon them and when they expire, that's a guarantee that you'll get those procs. So what I like about it is that the proc is a RNG and a mix of non-RNG elements that makes it more of a set in stone playstyle. On top of that, the playstyle when it comes to summoning pets and getting those instacasts, when it comes to building your soul shards and then trying to expand your soul shards and use them as much as possible, and trying to get as many demons as possible before you summon the demon commander to buff all of your demons on the board. Something about that just seems very fun. If you're someone who just loves being able to overpower the enemy and overwhelm them like a wave about to crash onto them, I feel like Demonology Warlock would be the best for you. I feel like the specialization, while it might not be the greatest for AoE or spread pressure, in terms of pure rotation and single target damage, it's probably the most fun one out there in the game right now. Honestly, I don't know how many people even worked on Demonology, but the specialization went from one of the weirdest specs and kind of sort of viable to, holy crap, this is the greatest thing since goddamn sliced bread. Speaking about bread, I would have to put Outlaw Rogue and Rogues in general as the #1 spot. Now, I know everybody's gonna say, but Dal, you're an Outlaw Rogue main. That sounds pretty biased. What are the chances you're just playing Rogue and maybe you're just telling people to want to play Rogue so then they'll come back to your channel because you'll say they're the best and then you'll make guides and then people watch the videos and then you can just add revenue and then actually make a lot of money. Yeah, you know what? That kind of does sound very greedy. But I'll be honest, Rogue actually feels that great. I'm somebody who was able to take the opportunity to play a bunch of classes for level 120 and level 110, pre-patch or beta, level a bunch of classes on both either beta, but because you can't really level on pre-patch, and I still keep coming back to Rogue. I'm somebody who came into BFA with an open mind, not knowing exactly what's going to happen to rogues, and I saw, okay, this is kind of cool. Oh, Assassination is getting a few cool changes, that's great. Oh, Subtlety is getting some things removed, I guess that's alright. But overall, I feel like I keep coming back to Rogue every single time. There's so many cool and exciting specializations, and maybe it's because I've been playing Rogue forever, so it could be that bias, but I feel like even though the specialization is not as complex or as revolutionary or mind-blowing when it comes to some of the changes other classes and specs got when it comes to BFA, I keep coming back to Rogue because what they've done for it in BFA, it's simple, clean, and beautiful. And in terms of simple, it has a clear-cut playstyle. You have energy bar. You spend energy bar to generate common points, and then you throw those common points into finishers and or buffs for yourself. Very, very simple. It is really hard to get that wrong. In terms of clean, they really cleaned up the playstyle for all three specializations. For Outlaw, they made it more like old school combat, where your auto attacks are doing a good chunk of damage, your basic abilities hit pretty hard, and the buff mechanic is there, but it's kind of like a flavor thing. You just roll the buffs and it gives you a few abilities that change your playstyle, maybe slightly, maybe major, but generally you still do damage regardless of the buff that you get. The buff is just like a flavor thing. For Assassination, there was a simple fix. Just make your mastery support both poisons and bleeds, and now you don't have to choose. You have to choose between a poison heavy playstyle or a bleed heavy playstyle. You couldn't just concoct together a monster that would do both, and now you can, which opens up so many more talents, so many more opportunities for you to play around with builds, which is on its own amazing. And then there's Subtlety, and that spec never really been that complicated as long as you were able to remember the rotation for your opener burst. And they took out your artifact weapon, which had a mechanic of finality, which kind of had you delay your eviscerates for a second eviscerate being the strongest. With that being gone, the spec became easier than it was. It makes even more sense, and was probably the most no-nonsense spec to begin with. In terms of beautiful, I mean, all three specs play really well, and they all have their own separate roles. You really have more definition for like the piratey Outlaw. You have a little more definition on the dot heaviness for the Assassination spec, and then Subtlety has having a little bit of like this ninja-esque vibe, but never has Blizzard really committed to it. Although there are a few cool looking talents, but it's not the flashiest spec, I would have to say. Still all feel really good, and regardless, I feel like they started feeling good from the beginning when it comes to BFA, and they still feel pretty good to the end of BFA. Again, it's a simple class. It's not all that complicated, but it's also kind of difficult to mess it up. And I feel like Blizzard has done a pretty good job basically not messing it up. So because of that, I would say people should at least check out Rogue at least once when it comes to BFA. At least level a Rogue. We got a couple different options of which kind of Rogue you want to level. The Dark Iron Dwarves and the Magcar will be coming out pretty soon, I hope, as an allied race. So that could be a pretty good excuse for you guys to get your brand new orcs from the Draenor or as a Dark Iron Dwarves to level them up and play some Rogue. It'll be a good excuse for a lot of people to even give it a chance, or if you want to level one right now, you're more than welcome to try while Prepatch is available if you have the time. And if you still weren't convinced, generally a class that has 3 DPS specializations, that is Mage, Warlock, Hunter, and Rogue, at least one of your 3 specs will be viable for Mythic Plus dungeons, raids, or PvP. So that is a pretty safe bet, because it will be hard for Blizzard to nerf every single spec of that one class and make him useless, as generally one of the specs will end up being at the top of the totem pole, no matter the changes that come to the game. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, go ahead and give it a like. If you want to see more videos from the channel, hit subscribe, notification bell, all that good jazz. As a last note, I just want to give you guys my thoughts on the classes and specializations that are kind of leading my decision of what I'm probably going to end up playing in BFA. I know that I'm going to play a Rogue. I know that I'm going to have to get on the Warlock and that Hunter. Warrior is probably going to be the first character I might end up leveling when it comes to EU servers, because I already have a Warrior on EU. And then a Monk is kind of competing there with some of the other classes towards the end of the spot, but I guess we'll have to cross the bridge when we get there. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. I don't think I found any of the other classes to be bad. If a certain class or spec didn't make it into this video in particular, there's not a single class or spec that I actually found awful or terrible. All of them are pretty good. Some I just like more than others. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in the next one.